Live from the Washington DC area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Welcome to Smart Sustainability. Climate change is keeping our heads spinning. We all have noticed weather patterns changed, seasons are not what they used to be, biodiversity disappearing at an alarming rate, and there's no sugarcoating it, and certainly more extreme weather coming our way. At this point, church leaders get involved together with heads of government around the world to try at varying degrees to come to a common consensus and a joint narrative. The problem is, with complexity, there never is a joint narrative, because there never is just one way of looking at things. See, complexity cannot be reduced or simplified, really. Every try has miserably failed, because simplicity, by definition, is the opposite of complexity. A nonlinear world can't be really answered with a linear, one-sided narrative. So by now we hear words like climate change, climate crisis, climate action, etc. Quite confusing, isn't it? Is it all the same? What's the difference between climate change and climate action? Where do we perhaps need to adapt, consider new ways of looking at things, and where can we act? Our topic tonight, good evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. Lots of demands, activities, outcries, and opinions are out there in terms of what to do with a changing climate. At this point, most people see a change. How to approach it, though, is quite a different story. What hasn't changed is our politicized approach of one-sided narratives and looking at things from a perspective of whatever may be convenient for a political agenda, versus really putting all of our minds together, recognize that a complex topic takes a holistic approach and a whole systems framework from every angle, and most above all, an open mind beyond political confines to try to understand what may be happening and what we can do. So let's try to tackle climate change and climate action and perhaps widen our perspectives on where to adapt, where to look closer, and what we can all do. Joining us tonight here in the studio with me is David Kepley. He is a board member of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions of Northern Virginia. Via Zoom, joining us is Neo Martinez, his director and president of Pacific Ecoinformatics and Computational Ecology Lab. We have Dr. Anastasia Pashigreva, an R&D scientist with a concentration in chemistry, who has worked on R&D projects in the UK, Germany, and the United States. She volunteers on the Alatra Climate Control Team, an international project with diverse scientists. And we pre-taped an interview with Dr. Vladimir Svirotkin. He's professor of geology, mineralogy, and volcanology at Moscow State University, who has studied the ozone layer for the last 30 years. So we covered quite a spectrum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Great to have you all on. I want to start right away with Anastasia. Climate change and climate disaster and climate action, Anastasia, what are they to you?
To me, climate change, it turned into just a general term, which everyone is using, but don't really understand what is this. Mm-hmm. Climate disasters, I believe that it's what we are experiencing now, and it's that we don't know what is the reason for it. And the climate action, it is something which needs to be done, but was not done so far. It's how I view it. And I really thank you for addressing this topic. This is very, very important.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are confused, so I thought it's really important to kind of put it a little bit in context. Neo, what are these three for you? Neo, can you hear us? I guess not, so we're going to straight to you for now. David, the Faith Alliance, do you treat those three equal? Is there like one common word that you all use, or do you make a differentiation between them?
Well, right now we've talked mostly, Nicolette, about climate change, but right now after the IPCC's most recent report, we've been talking about a code red climate disaster that we're in right now. And that to take half measures or partial measures is cheating ourselves and cheating our children's generations. So that's how we focus on that. And then we go to the next step, which is we are not scientists, but instead we are activists. And what we do is we advocate before the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors to get them to take climate change seriously. And I'm pleased to report that this week at their Tuesday meeting, they did two things that will help us. Small things, but they're steps in the right direction. The one is that they've passed a tax on plastic bags. And the second one is they passed a community-wide climate action plan, which pledges that Fairfax County will reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, by 75% by 2040, and by 100% by 2050. And so that's what we're pushing them to do, and we're going to hold their feet to the fire.
This sounds very comprehensive, but I have one question to follow up. So you said you're activists, not scientists. Define an activist.
Well, we're, as I say, most of us are people of faith. And so we approach these issues as a moral dilemma. What kind of world are we trying to give our children and our grandchildren, Nicolette? Do we want them to have a world which will be significantly worse than the world we have right now if we continue business as usual? So when I say we're an activists, we are going before our Board of Supervisors here in Fairfax County and in Richmond to our state legislators, and we're telling them how important this is to us and to other citizens. And we're urging them to take action. That's what I'm saying by activist.
Yeah, and I totally get that. I think there definitely is a need for that. I think there also is a big need to understand what's actually causing all of this and what's contributing. Otherwise, the actions are kind of like almost like a little stab in the blank, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
I wanted to see, is Neo back on? No, I guess not. Okay, so here's the thing. So we all have experienced weather extremes, right? We have, whenever humanity experienced actually weather extremes in the past, usually the go-to was always blaming someone. So when you look at, in the Middle Ages, for example, every time when there was a bad weather, they would usually blame it on the witches, or they would blame it on, other people, or they would blame it on someone who was just there. So what I'm getting is that humanity generally has a tendency to scapegoat people and kind of put the finger and say, this is the person's fault, and we seek an easy solution in terms of how do we get to this. And we do, I think, to some degree, something very similar now when we kind of keep stuck in the, this is what we need to do. We hear a narrative and then we act on that. So I want to get a little bit more to the bottom and really understand, first of all, amidst all of this complexity, how can we look at climate change and understand a little bit what's causing it, what's happening, and then go to the action part. So it sounds like Neo is back. Can you hear me?
Want me to take that one?
No, he's not on yet.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I'll be right more on in just a second. Sorry.
Okay, great. So Neo, let me repeat my question. I asked everyone before to give us sort of a definition of what they see as climate change, climate disaster, and climate action. I want to give you the same chance.
Climate change, climate disaster, and what was the third one?
Climate action.
Okay. Climate change, I would just say, is when the long-term weather changes in a certain direction, more precipitation, higher temperatures, things like different temperature regimes. That's what climate change is. It's basically big trends in long-term weather. Climate disaster was the other one?
Yep.
Climate disaster is when that causes major upheavals, large extinctions, mass starvation, those sorts of things. And climate action is basically when people organize to change our influence on the climate.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit now about the changes in the climate that we have been observing. And I think at this point, I mean, come on, there's no one on the planet, I think, who can say that the climate isn't changing. So let's look a little bit about as what are we observing from the more scientific way in terms of what's happening? Anastasia, I think can you sum up in terms of what you see, how the climate is changing, and where you see this all coming together?
So like what we see like as in ALLATRA, International Public Movement, we have a separate team, climate control, which monitors the number of the disasters like earthquakes, like eruptions, like anomalies like floodings. And what we see a really rapid increase in every of them. We see enormous floodings which occurring at every point of view. We see that weather is changing so dramatically. So if we never observed like tornadoes, for example, in Prague, then now we would see these tornadoes there. So the things which was not expected, which was not typical for certain region, it is what we are observing. At the same time, the magnitude of the earthquakes is consistently increasing. And another trend, what we see, it is synchronization of the cataclysm. So that it is not only one earthquake is occurring, but like it is a series of earthquakes which occurring simultaneously. And the power is increasing, and the number of lives which we are losing is increasing. And another trend, what we see is, for example, we do have some focus. For example, this year in Germany, people were expecting that it would be really dry weather, that it would be dry out. But what we observed is this horrible flooding, where we lost many, many lives, and no one was really expecting that. So I would describe that this situation is that we just simply don't know what will happen next. And very untypical events for some places, for the most of places are happening. Let's just take like Texas case, then we had this horrible freezing in winter, and which people was not absolutely prepared. And to me, what is most horrible, we are losing lives. And it's very important to address it. And it's very important to have this whole picture of what is going on the planet.
Absolutely. Is there a particular time frame in which, for example, the ALLATRA team was looking at how those changes were progressing?
So we are working on that, I think, for about at least 10 years, maybe earlier. And we started to alarming people since 2012, and we are saying that it is climate changes is happening. And now, while we are preparing to the conference on the climate crisis, which will be on December 4th, the Global Crisis Time for Truth, we collect the statistics, what is going on from our previous conference, where we also talk about climate change.
Yep.
And we want to show what happened during that time, how many earthquakes happened, how many floodings happened, how many lives were lost.
Yeah. Neo, from an eco perspective, I know you focus a lot on eco perspectives. Can you give us an overview in terms of what you've been observing, what you've been documenting, what you've noticed?
Yes, let's see, we have been observing pretty much what we've been predicting for many decades. Let's see, that when you add more energy in the atmosphere due to CO2, that first of all, temperature will go up. I think most people know that the record temperatures we've ever recorded have been basically this year, last year, recently. The records are continually being broken. The other thing is that the extremes, the cold and the heat extremes are increasing. And so we have, let's see, the changes, the long-term changes towards warming, the increased extremes are basically wiping out a lot of species. They're moving, species are moving towards the poles. We're losing biodiversity. The biodiversity that's left is trying to move where it's cooler. And so that's causing a lot of follow-on effects. And so the other species obviously depend on one another. So species that can handle the climate might not be able to handle the lack of food due to the loss of their prey species. And so we're finding deep ecological problems from fisheries to farms to natural ecosystems.
I do want to play at this place a clip of the pre-taped interview that I had with Professor, I have to read the name, Suborodkin, not easy to pronounce. Anyway, he has quite a different view actually, but I do want to play that for all of you. Just for our viewers also to know, it was an interview, it was simultaneously translated, so it was English-Russian. So I would invite your patience a little bit in terms of following along. This is not exactly easy material, and the video is about 7 minutes, but he also explains from where he's coming from the geology side and observing a different aspect of how the climate is changing, and thus then also add another conclusion to that. So have a listen.
Мнение и как он изменился с течением времени.
Before answering this, I would like to clarify this thought, and it is very important, I think. You have quite accurately noted that I am a geologist who has studied the ozone layer. Sometimes some of my interlocutors are amazed at this, and they say, well, you're a geologist, why do you care about the atmosphere? What I'd like to say is that the atmosphere is a planetary scale object, and we are discussing here in connection with the destruction of the ozone layer, in connection with climate change. We are talking about changes in the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Some say it's freons escaping, some say it's the amount of CO2 changing, but this is chemistry of a planetary scale. And there is a special science of geological cycle, it is called geochemistry. And so, in the first place, professionally, changes in the chemical composition on a planetary scale should be dealt with by geochemists. Unfortunately, as far as I know, I'm probably the only one. Well, based on available studies, I know only myself from among contemporary geologists who do this. Although our great scientist Vernadsky was involved in this field for a long time, and his disciple Vinogradov, who was a great geochemist, but right now, for some reason, probably it's a scandalous topic, so they're afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it, therefore. So a simple thought came to my mind that the hydrogen cycle of destruction was discovered like 2000 in 1962. Before the chlorus one of 1973, so I thought that hydrogens, and I know as a geologist and chemist, Earth breathes with hydrogen. And that's when I proposed this simple concept. Later, I was able to show and prove this. I have defended my thesis, PhD thesis, and I tell about it from a gnoseological point of view. And this is, it's not some kind of fake, but this is indeed a really serious study. So I have brought many books, many articles, and for 30 years I have conducted as a chemist, and I managed to show that the ozone layer, any ozone anomaly has a center, which from no other point of view can be explained. And these points, these centers of ozone anomalies, when I made maps of this, they stretched into certain chains that correspond to fault zones. And as a geologist, I look at the map of ozone anomalies and I see tectonic geological structure of the planet there. And when meteorologists look at these maps,
From 2006.
То есть получается, что с 2006 года по этот год, нынешнее время, какие изменения вы заметили? Вот, когда вы только начали смотреть на карту до нынешнего времени, какие изменения произошли?
well, we can say that even 30 years, because I knew about the ozone holes. I couldn't, look at it every day for 30 days, but for 30 years, but I knew the general situation. So 30 years ago, people did not talk more or less about this, but because it was quite normal. But after 70s, the destruction increased. So it is getting more and more depleted almost every day or every year. So during the course of time,
Is it accelerating? Can we see a tendency?
Это нарастает, да, то есть мы видим того, что нарастает вот разрушение озонового слоя, правильно, да?
yes, that's for certain. I can say, like in this studio, we made a report on that, but right now, I would like to point out that not only in Antarctica, when it is known, it is increasing there too. I mean, the destruction of the ozone layer, we can see it in the Antarctica, but most dangerous thing is that it happened in the northern hemisphere. For example, in 2005 and 2011, the observations showed that the ozone anomaly is a big one. It was there for 3 to 4 months. The center was almost all the time above the Taimyr city. It is Taimyr, the Laptev Sea, these are large geographic locations, and we see the depletion of the ozone layer in all northern hemisphere. So in March 2011, it was 35% only of the ozone layer. So it is millions of square kilometers. It is the parameters of Antarctica ozone layer. I mean, they're similar. Then it was a little delayed. The destruction of the ozone layer actually goes all over the planet. I mean, these big ones. But in 2016, there was again a very strong destruction again in the center of those places, and there was 40% loss of the ozone layer. Then it again regained a little, then delayed. But in 2020, last year, the center moved to Canada in March, minus 50%. This is what average monthly loss of the ozone layer. It's a crazy figure. I mean, we can see it in Arctic Ocean in the region of our Taimyr, and 50% loss. And the area is huge again. So what conclusion can you make of this? Right, this is the first half of the year, January to March, even up to May. That was a strong destruction like this. But in Antarctica, it has just begun now. A strong destruction has begun on the 29th of August. And right now, in September, we have seen minus 50.
So these are actually pretty staggering numbers, I think. At this point, really, no one can doubt that things are changing. Now, let's move a little bit in terms of what that means for ecosystems, how we are all affected, and what to expect going forward. So let's start with you, David, here, in terms of the Faith Alliance.
Yes.
So what is the common denominator where the Faith Alliance stands in terms of going forward, what to expect? How do you prepare your constituency in terms of what to expect?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've asked the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors to take it seriously and to plan for how do we reduce our carbon footprint in this county. A second initiative that we're also pushing for, and which should start a little bit, it already has begun, but we'll be kicked off more fully a little later in the year, and that is they're calling it resilient Fairfax. In other words, climate change is already here. The scientists that we've already heard from have already told us that. It's abundantly clear. Wildfires in California, terrible hurricanes, and so on. You know the statistics, so do your viewers. But okay, so how do we harden our infrastructure so that Fairfax County doesn't become like Texas did during that freak snowstorm, like the poor people in Louisiana who got hammered by yet another hurricane? How do we prevent that sort of thing from happening here? And where the Faith Alliance is particularly moved in all of this, Nicolette, is people of faith are concerned about other human beings. I've had a good friend tell me at one point, it's not about polar bears and penguins, it's about people.
Well, it's about the penguins and the polar bears too, though.
It's about all three. That's the point. But it impacts people.
Yes, it
and
does.
it does impact those people who are the most vulnerable members of our society, more so than it does in other members of society. I can give you examples of that if you're interested, but
no, we're good for now.
You're good for now, okay.
Yeah. So I do want to talk a little bit about what to expect going forward in terms of ecosystems. Now that we talked about the polar bears and the other ones, I do want to talk a little bit in terms of what to expect for us if we continue with the climate change. What do we sort of look really straight into the eye within the next 20, 30 years? So Anastasia, you want to ask you next? You want to take that? What do you expect going forward?
You know, like I would like to address this statement which David made and ask, you're talking about the carbon dioxide and you highlight that it is very important thing to address. But like carbon dioxide topic there for at least 10 years, we are collecting our taxes. We are sending our money to deal with this problem. What kind of, it was like everyone thinks that it is a CO2 and people faithfully think that if we will reduce CO2, it will not be these disasters happening. Just do we really have results showing that investing in this problem, addressing this problem, make less disasters or make less these catastrophic changes of the weather?
That's actually a good point, Anastasia, because I did want to talk about the causes and pick this one up because I think the focus is all on the CO2 and that's not just the right focus. I think there are other things that we need to look into and that's what we want to do. So let's switch again. Let's go straight to that. Let's talk about the causes. So go ahead, Anastasia.
No, I would like to, David, just since he's raising this topic that it is important to deal with the CO2, just could you please give us example how dealing with CO2 help us to improve current situation? Just what we observe, it's getting worse and worse, and we are putting more and more money. It sounds like there is no really effect of this action.
What was your question, Anastasia?
So my question is that do we observe any effect after investing all our efforts in decreasing CO2? Do we observe any improvements on our planet? And why it is important to address CO2? Do we have any proven facts which telling us that?
I think that question needs to go to Neil.
Yeah, I would say yes, we do. Well, first of all, we've spent a lot of money. We've lowered the carbon intensity of much of what we do on the planet. I'm sorry for the wind noise. Let's see, but we have to do much more. And as we do much more, we aren't going to see, it's going to continue getting worse. The climate is obviously a planetary system. There's lots of momentum. We've already put a huge amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Its effects that we see now will be ongoing for a long time. The only thing we really can do is try and stop them from getting worse. And so that means that we have to, we basically need to stop pulling the oil and the gas out of the ground. We've got to stop burning it. If we want to do that and still maintain our lifestyle, we need to produce our energy in other means, such as solar and wind. So, yep, we've invested a lot of money. We aren't going to see an improvement. The best right now we can hope for is to lessen the negative impacts that, as the previous speaker said, or an earlier speaker said, is very clear to everyone.
Anastasia, you have something to add on this one?
Yes. So David said that we have deadly fires in California and we blame carbon dioxide, that it is a high temperatures. But why we don't talk about other factors? For example, Professor Sivaratkin talking us about that there is a hydrogen release on the earth core cracks, and that hydrogen by burning creating these fires. Why we don't address these kind of things? And then I do agree with Neo that he's saying that we will even if we remove all carbon dioxide right now, we will stop produce carbon dioxide. Weather will not change. And my question, why do we continue to believe in this? Maybe we should look outside of the box. Let's look at other opportunities. Why we don't analyze the history, this 12,000 years cycle? It is, especially no one really talks about this, but it was in our past 12,000 years ago, Earth went through very dramatic climate change. And we saw the rise of the temperatures, like melting of this ice and all these like catastrophic events, and we are facing them now. And instead of talking about this, instead of talking how we will deal with all this, we are essentially talking about carbon dioxide. I think it is just distraction, to be honest.
So that's interesting, because you both actually, when I spoke with Neo yesterday, he mentioned a similar argument on the other side. He said if we kind of focus on cycles, it's just distraction. But I think, as I told Neo also, I think there is more to it, and I think we all need to keep an open mind and look deeper. I do want to play the next video clip from the interview with Professor Svirotkin to see what he had to say more about the gases, how they release, and what that actually does have to do with dying of fauna and also, you know, fauna and flora and animals. So let's play the video and see what he said.
This is not anthropogenic factor, and it is not a mix. There is one specific reason, the main one. There are some processes that can influence it. For example, the dynamics of the atmosphere. The main process is the release of hydrogen from the core of the Earth. It's the main process that goes on the planet. In the space behind the Earth, there are two gases, hydrogen. The planet is losing this. It's hydrogen and helium. They fly away into the space, but the hydrogen is very active gas, and passing through the ozone layer, it cannot but destroy it. And that's what I did. And the reason why, well, I know, I've proved it. I put sensors in the places where there release of hydrogen, and I managed to catch it, how the ozone layer is being destroyed. So I wrote the maps. So, but why here now this process is increasing? I don't know. And this where I see the danger, because before, until now, people say about Montreal Protocol that blame Freol, but these concepts or hypotheses that are in the basis the Montreal Protocol, they didn't concern themselves. They say the same, that if we remove freons, then in 2005 already the destruction of the ozone layer on the planet will stop. By the middle of the century, it will be restored to the level of the 70th century, but we do not see all of that. I'm not talking about some certain number of facts. we stopped the cause, but the process not stopping. So this was not the reason. That what we need to understand and fix. And after that, we should go back to the Vienna Convention, which has long before, in 85 years, called on all scientists to study the causes of destruction of ozone layer. But after a few years, we gave up all this. Some say that it was fraud. Someone got few billions dollars in profit, someone lost, and after a few years, everyone shouted, "What a good deal!" But now we see that it didn't justify itself, and now the threats are growing. And what is the threat of the hydrogen evolution is, first of all, dangerous. In 2016 and 2020, there were big destruction. Imagine these gases that release from the core, like the 70% of the Earth is oceans. So when these gases goes from the core through the ocean, and all these fauna that on the way of these gases they die, all these fishes that die, or whales eat, all connected to these releases of these gases. When the fauna dies, and it's like how it was millions of years ago, because the birds also die and they fall from the sky. In America it was the same, like a Canadian geese fell. Or, for example, we'll take the Arkansas River. It was in 11th year, 2011, on New Year, there was 2,000 of birds fell there. And at the same time, fishes died in the Arkansas River. How we can explain these two processes? Only with this emission of gases that pass the river, and all the birds also came into that ozone gases, into that.
So obviously there are more factors and they're a little bit more interconnected, and I think this is what makes it so difficult for everyone to kind of understand and get the full picture. So far we have the narrative that's sort of being told most of the time it's the CO2. Maybe it's also because with the CO2 we feel that we can do something about it, whereas when we see other factors where we see that they're there but we can't really explain it, they're more difficult to tackle. So Anastasia, can you explain to us a little bit, you were referring to it first to the 12,000 cycle. Explain to us a little bit the 12,000 cycle, what that means, but I also think it's important to look at this in a way that that's not just something that says, well, this is normal. I think there are two things. I think there is one thing that we're definitely abusing and polluting the planet. I think that's out of question, right? Everybody kind of sees that that's the case, and we need to stop doing this. The other part is the climate change. What part is the natural part of the cycle, and what part is maybe something that is man-made, and what part is something that we have to prepare for. So explain to us a little bit, please, what you meant by the 12,000 year cycle.
So 12,000 years cycle, it is astronomical cycle through which our planet and whole solar system is going through. And it is related to the intergalactic interaction. It is about the position of solar system and our planet in a galaxy. And every 12,000 years, our solar system moving through the Orion arms of our galaxy. And we have 2 points of interaction with another galaxy, near and far. And this full cycle takes 24,000 years when we are located at near point of interaction with another galaxy. And there is smaller cycle, 12,000 years. So every 12,000 years on a planet occurring very devastating, catastrophic changes. So last cycle was 12,000 years ago. And at that moment, what we observed it was really humongous disasters. It was like earthquakes, it was a huge displacement and like rise of the level of ocean, rapid increase in the temperature. So, and we scientists finding the proofs for these cycles, geological, like people find the layers of coal, volcanic ash, and flooding effects. And you can, if you will search really well for this information, it will come up. And the thing is that this is a cosmic effect. And this is what's happening at all planets of our solar system. So currently on Mars, we observe the melting of the ice caps, and there is no any anthropogenic greenhouses there. So, and this is what we need. We don't have technologies in order to deal with this. Because of this 12,000 years cycle, we are right at the active point of this cycle. We observe this increased earthquake, increased anomalies, increased eruptions. So we don't really have power to influence that. Then returning to your point about abusing our planet, I think everyone agrees with that. And at the moment, we are really killing our planet. And I think Professor Martinez knows much more about that. And the fact, for example, of that Amazon forests, it was shown that they don't produce oxygen. They start releasing CO2. It really alarming. So many things like trash, this mountain of trash in the Pacific Ocean, and microplastic, which is coming from this water to everywhere. This is really horrible. But what is bad is that we are at the active part of the cycle, and the cataclysms are getting to get worse. But the fact that we also damaged as a humans, we had such a negative impact on planet, it is going to make situation even worse on the planet. And this is place for our responsibility. But we cannot influence on earthquakes. We cannot
Anastasia,
influence.
but we can influence the part of what we do in terms of how to not negatively influence the planet to further contribute. Because that part we don't really know, right? So we do know there is some things we can do, and there's something where things are just going with that. I do want to give Neo a chance now that you of course mentioned him. Neo, what's your response to that?
Well, I think it's the International Panel on Climate Change who has won the Nobel Prize. It gathers hundreds, I think thousands of scientists to deal with these issues. And I agree that they're difficult to understand the cycles. I love the molecular cycles. The fact is the sun isn't quite at the center of our solar system. It's a little bit off. And so then there's not only that 12,000 year cycle, there's 100,000 year cycles. There's a bunch of them. And we've had this planet going for 3 billion years. One of the wonderful pieces of evidence that we have for the veracity of our understanding is our ability to incorporate those cycles and predict what they call post-predict the climate over the last, say, 500 million or more years. That gives us confidence that in the future predictions, and also the future predictions, say 10, 20 years ago, have been very, very accurate. I would say slightly underestimating the change, but remarkably accurate. And so all that evidence, it's sort of like COVID. If we pay attention to the majority, the mainstream scientific opinion that places like South Korea and New Zealand and even China, they were able to stop the COVID, greatly reduce the COVID pandemic. If we pay attention to folks like the International Panel on Climate Change and carbon dioxide as the main cause of our change, I'd say the second cause would be methane. We can like other countries have done COVID in their country, if the world pays attention to the IPCC, we can reduce the worst effects.
Okay, this one I'm going to have to challenge right out of the bat, because that one, I think that the message that comes across is that there is mainstream scientists and there are other scientists, and to me that comes across in terms of, oh, that's an opinion that we kind of like, so we follow, and when there's a different opinion, then that's a little bit a different issue. And I think that's where we err, because there is a number of scientists that have opposite opinions on things. And as I said in my intro, complexity cannot be reduced to only one mainstream. That is an issue that I think we all have to face, and I think really we would be better off if we start looking at all the different factors that are there, come together and say, okay, let's see what's to that, let's see what you can contribute, let's see what you can contribute, and then we have the full picture. So on this one, actually, as long as we talk about interconnections, I do want to play another video from the interview I had with Professor Svirotkin. He talks a little bit about interconnections of the UV layers that I think for us all to understand is also brings another thing in the mix to consider. So let's see what's it's a short video. Let's see what he had to say.
This is the first thread. It is connected with the emission of the gases, but this gas destroys the ozone layer, and the threat, the danger of destroying of ozone layer. Well, we have the Montreal Protocol about this, and I absolutely agree with it, that ultraviolet, we have more emissions of ultraviolet, and and that's why it badly influence the people. For example, if we talk about Italy, in Italy, for 12 months, the ozone deficiency was terrible. The population in Italy were the resorts, they're like naked on the beaches, and they could already lose immunity. And before the epidemic in Germany, and there was the strong destroy of the ozone layer. And why? I don't understand why we signed the Madrid Protocol, which turned upside down all the chemical industry, but when we come to the reality, when the ozone layer is destroyed and we have a pandemic, and we do not pay attention to the fact that the ozone layer is destroyed, must be taken into account, because it reduces the immunity of a person. The second threat, when ultraviolet comes here to the surface of the Earth, ground level ozone begins to form, and this is a terrible poison. And the first thing it affects is lungs. Here in Moscow this summer, when there was an outbreak and pandemic, and at the same time, the level of the ground level ozone was exceeded 3 times, and this is very strong poison. And no one didn't said anything about it, and we should be honest. Let's really study all the details of this process. Yes, I can just draw many effects of the nature that no one pays attention to.
So I found this really interesting, because everyone, there's so many different perspectives in there, and there's so many different aspects in there. We talk about evidence, but the fact of the matter is that when you look for evidence, there are a lot of different evidences when we look at different factors, and we can't just kind of singly point saying this is just one direction, they got it right and the others got it wrong. I think that's really a danger we're all falling in. Yes, David.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yes.
I think you may be glossing over what the IPCC has done. The IPCC has brought together, as one of our speakers has mentioned, like 195 to 200 scientists. the first thing that academics do, it's part of their DNA, is to challenge one another, to bring in all the perspectives, exactly what you're talking about, Nicolette. And so to assume that there's a single narrative out there is a bit of an oversimplification. I think you've got a variety, you've got a variety of narratives going on, and they've had to bang heads against each other and have come up with something that we need to have to take action on. So I think that's what I'm seeing.
No one debates the actions, David. No one debates the actions. I want people to start looking at different factors and stop saying it's only the CO2, because I don't think that's correct.
Well, I think if you look at the IPCC report, they're not talking about CO2 alone. They're talking about greenhouse gases.
No, but I also
and some of the
find it
greenhouse
very
gases, as one of your speakers mentioned, was also
yes,
methane,
but
which is very
also
powerful.
We have to be very careful that we don't get away from science into scientism. Those are two different things.
Exactly.
And scientism is where we go into one direction. And I'm saying, I think we need to look at this from a much larger perspective to actually really
What
get
makes
to
you
the bottom.
think that we haven't done that?
I don't think we have done that, because when you look
What
at
makes you think we haven't done that?
Because when you look at the common narrative that's been pushed out, it's all CO2. And all of these other factors, no, I'm not misreading this, and that's not the debate of the show. This is the fact of the matter is that we have one joint narrative, and whenever somebody challenges that, it's kind of said, oh, there's not enough evidence, or there's something put out. And I think that's where we all err. So I do want to look at other things. No one debates that we need to do stuff about this. You know, we can reduce the trash. We can take action on things that we need to change our economic system and stop exploring. I know Neo mentioned, you know, we need to stop pumping oil out. Well, yeah, absolutely. Those are not, no one debates that. But I think it's too easy to just say, you know, the Arctic melting is just from the CO2, and actually we don't have enough time. But I do have an interview with that one where someone challenges that and actually says that's not the case. Another scientist. So that's the point. But I let Anastasia, I see you nod your head, Anastasia, but join in.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Nicolette. I really respect your brave position and that you're challenging this point of view. Yeah, I highly respect IPCC, but I must say that there is no intergalactic interactions and there is no 12,000 cycles were addressed there. At the same time, we do find number of people who were reviewing their report, and they also finding things which should be addressed and which should be looked more carefully. So yes, coming back to this point about melting of the ice caps, what we are finding and scientific papers stating, for example, in Antarctica, the melting happened due to the heat flow which is coming from below. It is not from the top, but from below. And it is what is happening. And whatever actions we would do, we cannot stop this heat from below. But you know, like what I really want to switch, if you allow me, Nicolette, you know, like we are all people here who are caring about our planet, who are caring about our future. And maybe we should think how we should address, let's rather think how we should act together, what we could do, and essentially like ALLATRA International Public Movement and Creative Society projects, it unites all people with different point of view. What we really need to challenge each other, but we need to start acting. And this climate action, it is really important thing right now. There is nothing more important for our future. Maybe we should somehow find a way how we will work all together and find solutions.
So let's start with that, because we got 4 minutes left, and in this last segment, in this last 4 minutes, I do want to talk about what we can do, what are steps we need to take, and what's sort of out there. So I know we all agree now, okay, we need to have a more open mind and look at more facts. Done. We focus on that. I think we heard you say Faith Alliance talks more about resilience. So we're better prepared if climate disasters come, so we can actually protect the vulnerable, we protect people, we can have a better disaster preparedness.
Not if, but when.
When, yeah, when it comes. So then we talked about Neo, you're next. We talked a little bit about the stopping from the gas from below. Trash, let's talk about trash, huge issue.
Plastic.
Well, I would say that it's not, it's a huge issue. It's a whole big planet. There's all of these issues are huge issues. There are, to make a choice of how to act is a critical decision for all of us. The IPCC and others, in terms of other factors, oh my God, if you ever look at these models, the number of factors, the cycles, the different layers, that what was mentioned, the ocean circulation, the fact that the poles are being melted from underneath. It's beautiful. The ocean circulation models, they're wonderful, almost art, but they're science, but it's amazing. So what to do about it? I think people have thought long and hard about this. I think Greta Thunberg is a wonderful thinker on this subject. I think the Green New Deal is a wonderful action that we can support and help to reduce the major effects of climate change. They are going to get worse. It's not going to happen right away, but there's a wonderful, brilliant community out there working on both the science and the human dynamics of what we need to do, and we should support them.
So it seems to me, though, then what we also need to do is bring together, do more studies and really understand more about all of the details in what's happening and see it more in an interconnected way, which is so far kind of, well, it's not been done enough. It just hasn't. I think that's a big part. So I do want to give, we're almost out of time now, I do want to give everyone the chance to give a final, would you want our viewers to take from that, David, from tonight? It's got to be quick.
It's got to be quick. Okay, take a deep breath. Go for it. Thanks, Nicolette, for inviting me on the show and the other guests as well. I think all of your viewers have been very much rewarded by the information that we've gotten tonight. If I was going to say to our viewers, okay, so what is it that I want you to take away from this? And that is, it's about the people. It's about vulnerable people. It's about people in communities who will be hurt by climate change. And it's so we need to develop programs and thinking about how we can help those people resist those things and harden our infrastructure so that we can resist the inevitable effects of climate change, and then start working on reversing them. And start at the local level and move up through the state level and move up to the national level.
That's great. Anastasia, what's your final word? Gotta be quick.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Nicolette, and thanks to both our guests. I highly respect you. And so what I would like to say is that a lot of people really afraid of climate change. Then you talk to them, they are really scared. And I think the reason for because person is really afraid that he will be one-on-one with disaster and no one is going to help him. And I think the only solution is to change our values. Then the value of society would be changed, that the first value should be human life. And that will be in the head of every person, with the politicians, with the scientists.
I agree. It's
with
about
every neighbor. Then I will not allow my neighbors.
We're out of time, Anastasia. Yes. I'm going to have you cut you off. Thank you so much. Nia, one final word. Make it quick.
Beyond the humans, obviously important. There's ecosystems. There are species out there that are being lost forever. There are beautiful ecosystems that are being lost. We need to change our behavior now.
It's about carbon. Thank you so much for all of you. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously, you see it's still really a hotly debated topic and a lot to do, but there are things we can do, and there are things we can look better to get better prepared and kind of really go with the flow. Thanks so much for watching. We see you next week. Have a good night.
Thank you, Nicolette.
Thank you.